Hi, everyone. It is Courtney and Devin again for another episode of Eat Meat and Question Everything. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Anthony Chafee. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Chafee.
Yeah, you were very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm sure 99% of the people who are watching this know who you are already, but can you just give us like a quick rundown of you, yourself, what you're doing, and how you found carnivore?
Yeah, so I'm an American doctor. I'm currently practicing in Australia, specializing in neurosurgery, but I've also always had an interest in diet and nutrition, how that affects health and disease, and also athletic performance coming from a professional rugby background. I was always very interested in that. And so that was something that, 20 some years ago, I was taking cancer biology and just learned how toxic plants were and how they were carcinogenic and mutagenic, and they could have all these defense chemicals because that's how they survive in nature. That's how they stop animals and insects and fungus and things like that from eating them. So I just stopped eating plants altogether after that and felt amazing. And my athletic performance and intellectual performance went through the roof at the time. And I slipped off of it because I didn't really realize how significant it was. And then and I sort of thought like, well, maybe incorporating a few things wouldn't be that big of a deal, but it actually was a big deal and made a big difference. But that was a sort of a slippery slope. And I sort of slipped off it more and more. And then just sort of got back to eating sort of as I normally did, very meat based, not really any processed foods, but still eating fruits, vegetables, carbs, things like that. And then sort of 5, 6 years ago, I came across information where like, no, humans, like from all intents and purposes, have evolved as carnivores and have been living as carnivores for millions of years. And that is what we're biologically adapted to eat and thrive on. And so things just started clicking into place. And I was a doctor at that point, and I was looking at medicine from that standpoint, that humans are animals, and the kind of animal we are has a specific biologically appropriate diet. And if you eat outside of that diet, things are going to go wrong, as they do with any other animal species out there. This is why there's signs at the zoo and parks that say don't feed the animals. This isn't their food. That makes them very sick. And so, we're animals too. And if we eat outside of our species specific nutrition, we're going to get sick. And so things just started clicking into place from a chronic disease standpoint and just a general health standpoint. So that's what I've been doing for a while, is trying to research and get into the literature, see what we can prove, see what we know, which is actually quite a lot, and then use that to try to help people get better.
So that's a great segue because you did a really awesome talk about why we're carnivores, very straightforward.
Mhm.
And I think on social media, Courtney, especially on her page, gets asked all the time, well, what are the characteristics? Like, why do you think this way? So from a biological ancestral standpoint, characteristics, what specific characteristics for people who are very questioning towards this lifestyle, what about us as people characteristically points to that proper human ancestral diet?
Yeah. Well, I think that you have to think of this in the context of who we are. We say we're primates, right? So we have primate anatomy and physiology with certain changes and adaptations that I think point towards us being carnivores. And there are carnivorous primates. It's not like it's only gorillas and chimpanzees out there. There are plenty of carnivorous primates. And in fact, some of the oldest primates that are still around are purely carnivores, right? So we are carnivores. We come from an herbivorous past. Actually, about 6 to 8 million years ago, our ancestors were herbivorous. And so we have certain characteristics, like a jaw that can move side to side. Normally, you see that in herbivores. But the thing is, you don't lose a trait evolutionarily unless there's a survival advantage to losing that trait. Otherwise, it just perpetuates because there's no driving factor to make it go away. But we have small teeth, small jaws, small muscles of mastication because we're chewing on softer things. Meat is actually quite soft. Sticks and leaves and fiber is actually quite hard. You have to be chewing to break that down. That's why gorillas have much bigger teeth, much bigger jaws. And say, oh, well, we don't have these big canines and fangs like a dog or a cat. It's like, well, right. Well, we don't kill things with our mouths, first of all. But look at a gorilla. They have big fangs. They don't eat any meat. They don't use those to hunt. That's not what those are for. Those can be defensive as well as offensive. And also, um, we have other changes as well, because we didn't need the big teeth and the big fangs and the big claws, because we use tools. In fact, we had to use tools because we didn't have those characteristics. And so, like, well, it's like a lion or a wolf can take something down with their mouth and their claws. We weren't able to, so we had to figure it out. We had to use our brains. We had to sort of, use our brains, use our techniques and tactics. We developed tools. We developed other sorts of means to get this nutrition. And that's why we have advanced technology and our brains grew. That was a driving factor for our brains. Whereas if you have the physical characteristics to just get your food, people say it's like, oh, we must be frugivores because our hands are perfectly adapted to pick an apple. I'm like, okay, well, but your brain's not going to grow too big if you're just doing exactly what you're perfectly physically adapted to do, and, when you have other primates that just have their physical adaptations and they can just pick fruits and pick leaves and do all that sort of stuff. Their brains aren't that big, and they don't have any reason to be that big. Chimpanzees are getting a bit smarter. They're also using sticks and making spears to hunt. It's like Planet of the Apes going on, but like, that's kind of getting a little freaky, but, but they're more intelligent than, say, gorillas, who don't do that. And so, the tools that they're using to, like, get twizzle termites or use this stick to, like, hunt monkeys, which is crazy. So that's developing their brain. More importantly than that, though, we have very low stomach pH, like very, very low, like to the level of like a buzzard or a vulture, because our ancestors were not able to hunt big animals right away. We were scavenging, we were eating carrion, and we were using rocks to break open the skulls of animals going back millions of years. This is the first instance of tool using. And so we had to eat this like half rotten flesh. It had a high bacterial content. And also we haven't had refrigerators more than a century. So this is, something that we've had to contend with for a long time. So we have a very low stomach pH. This is something you see in scavengers and carnivores. Like, lions will have like a pH of 2. Ours is about 1.5 or less. So it's very, very, very acidic. Whereas like a cow and other herbivores would be like, 6, 7, something like that. And so it's very different from that standpoint. Also, our guts are very different. People talk about how, oh, we have, the guts of an herbivore. Well, that's not true. First and foremost, we just talk about function. We cannot break down fiber. We don't have that ability anymore. And so, function is the driving factor there. And so we don't have the ability to break down plants very well. We have a great ability to break down meat. And people say, oh, you can't break down meat. That's a lie. That is a flat out falsehood. You can break down meat and liquefy it and absorb it in the first part of your small intestine in an hour or so. You cannot ever break down fiber. It doesn't happen. And so you have to pass it out. So that's another reason, is the function. But if you just look at the form, right? So we have low stomach pH, right? That's indicative of being a carnivore. We actually have a longer, elongated small intestine, much longer than other primates. And this is also in keeping with carnivores. And our large intestine is much shorter, and then much shorter in proportion to other primates and other herbivorous primates. And other carnivorous primates were sort of matching up as well. Then, talking about the fiber thing, we used to be able to break down fiber. And how we used to do that is by having this elongated cecum, which is now an appendix, very small little vestigial organ. This is something, I learned in, grade school biology. This is a vestigial organ. This is something that millions of years ago did something. Now it does nothing. And it's just sitting there. Well, millions of years ago, it was this 4-foot long cecum, and that's in other primates who are herbivorous. They have this very elongated cecum, and that's where fiber packs into and breaks down into short chain fatty acids through the bacteria that they cultivate there. No vertebrate animal can break down fiber, so they have to cultivate these specific bacteria. So we've lost that. That's because we haven't used that cecum to break down fiber in millions upon millions upon millions of years. And so there was a survival advantage to get rid of that organ because we weren't using it, and it was taking energy and resources to maintain that. And so that was a survival advantage to go away from that. Herbivorous primates all have very large cecums. And in fact, they're called hindgut digesters. And there's a lot of other animals, like koalas are hindgut digesters too. There's a lot of other animals that have that elongated cecum, and that's how they can break down fiber. So those are sort of the main ones I think that go into that. Also, we aren't, herbivorous animals are able to break down fiber with the bacteria that are in their gut into short chain fatty acids. Okay, so they're still getting the majority of their calories from fatty acids, from fat, saturated fat, and then the die off of those bacteria, they're absorbing those as well, and that's where they get protein. So the majority of their calories are still coming from fat and protein. We don't have that ability anymore. We can't extract those same nutrients to that degree anymore from plants, and so we really have to eat, you know, animals and the fat from those animals. That's why we have, the ability to absorb high amounts of fat with our bile. We produce about a liter, 800 mils to a liter of bile every day, and that corresponds with the amount physiologically that I think your body wants to absorb in fat. So it's quite a lot of fat. You can't really absorb fat without bile. And so we have four organs all working in concert just to absorb fat, right? Liver makes bile, gallbladder absorbs it, pancreas produces lipase and other enzymes to break it down, and your small intestine absorbs it. So we have four major organs all working together just to absorb fat, right? And other primates, they do that in their hindgut, through the breakdown process of fiber. So I think there's quite a lot. And then, so just physiologically, and anatomically, and biologically, that is in keeping with us being carnivores. But also there's just a ton of fossil record, the stable isotope research that's been done, tons of different studies that use this all over, with ancient Egyptians, as well as going back tens of thousands of years, millions of years, and looking at what people ate. You can actually tell what people ate or what different animals ate. And you can tell if they were eating a bunch of plants, or if they were eating animals that ate plants, or if you're eating animals that ate animals that ate animals that ate plants, right? So you can actually, stratify the actual food chain. And they found that humans, Neanderthals, and our ancestors had a higher carnivore rating, or at the top of the food, or higher at the position on the food chain than lions, hyenas, foxes, and wolves alive at the same time in the same area. So for me, this is all very good information pointing towards the fact that we're carnivores. And when you see in practice people going from a plant-based diet, or a traditional diet, or even a Mediterranean diet, and going to a purely meat-based diet, carnivorous diet, and their health improving dramatically by all metrics, I think that's just, a proof of the theory right there.
Yeah, that all is fascinating. I learned a lot. But it's just weird that a lot of people don't care about everyone's benefits, or everyone sharing these stories. Like they're still like, yeah, no, like that's not healthy, but it's like all this proof that you said, and we're thriving, and it's still like not good enough for people.
Yeah. Well, it takes a lot of, it takes a lot to turn around these sorts of public opinion, and especially because this has been driven into people's heads for 50 years now and longer. I mean, the sugar companies have been trying to vilify fat since the 1950s and say, yeah, well, fat's really not good for you. And so, but you need those calories. So why don't you replace them with sugar? Isn't that a good idea? Just literally just replace, hundreds, if not, over 1,000 calories a day just by eating sugar, because it's an empty calorie. It just gives you energy, and that fat, it could be bad. You never know. And that was something that Ansel Keys, that douche, he argued, like he said, he was just like, well, cholesterol and fat, may or may not be bad for you, but like, what does it hurt? Like, not eating it isn't going to hurt you. So why do you just, play it safe, not eat it, replace it with sugar, and you'll be all right. Well, he was a paid shill of the sugar companies. He was bought and paid for by the sugar companies. Now, maybe he did some good research earlier in his life. He's the guy who came up with the RDAs, which are only applicable if you're eating a mixed diet, because that's who they were studying at the time. And he got his reputation, was able to affect such change and be in a position to be bought off because he had done a lot of work. But I think that everything he's done ever is suspect. We know that he was bought off. We know that he's falsified his information. We know that he has fudged the numbers and cherry picked data. We know that. That's a matter of record now. So maybe some of this stuff is true. Maybe he did some good research. I think you throw it all out because the guy is suspect. We know that he was bought off in certain regards and in certain instances. So everything that he is now is just, fruit of the poison branch. Like it's just he is a fraud. And so how do we know which ones are fraudulent and which ones aren't, which ones are good science and which ones are, you don't know. You can never know. So you just have to throw it out and just be like, well, you're useless, and get rid of it.
It's so funny because if this were like, especially this day and age, if this were any other facet of study, he would have been totally like written off as, a fraud immediately. But because it's just so ingrained in society, they won't do it, because then everyone else is liable that has ever followed his advice. But can you imagine if this were in any other, academic setting? He would just I would be like, oh, no. He would be totally invalidated. But can you imagine the money that would have to be fronted for all the horrible, horrible nutrition advice that they have been recommending for so long? I mean, they just can't at this point. It's so messy.
Yeah, well, it's a good point, because like you look at the tobacco companies, they had the tobacco, documents that came out, for decades. They were saying, no, there's no evidence that, tobacco and nicotine is addictive, or that it causes cancer. It's like, well, there's this study that shows this. It's like, oh yeah, but look at this other study that showed that. It's like, yeah, you paid for that study. All right. And, and so that's the thing and that's what they do. And that's what the sugar companies do. They put out all this opposition research. And they've been doing this since the 50s. Saying that sugar is always actually good for you, or it's safe at least, and that fat's bad, and all these sorts of things. And so it muddies the water. And so you say like, oh, look at all these studies that show X, Y, and Z. It's just like, yeah, they're all bought and paid for. They're all industry research. And while that doesn't necessarily mean that they're garbage, it does make you think. And so if every single piece of industry research is saying one thing, and every single piece of independent research is saying another, you have to wonder. And the reason that they do this is because now they're just like, oh, look, it's 50-50. We've got half the studies saying X and half the studies saying Y. So I guess we need to think about it more. And like, well, if you hadn't put out all this garbage, then it would be a very different story. And that's something that they do to protect themselves. The tobacco companies did for decades to protect themselves and protect their interests. And then it blew up in their face when they had actual documents leaked out to Congress that said like, oh yeah, there's all of their own studies were showing that tobacco and smoking were addictive and caused cancer, or at least had a high association with cancer. And so that came out, and they got, fined like hundreds of billions of dollars. Well, now we have the sugar documents. We have from sugar, different sugar companies back in like the 50s and 60s talking about how there was research actually showing that sugar was actually causing heart disease. And like, well, we need to put something out there. We need to get a scapegoat. And they picked cholesterol and saturated fat. And so, we have documentation of them paying off Ansel Keys, of them paying off multiple other professors. Like there was the Journal of the American Medical Association published a review by the University of California, San Francisco in 2016, where it was actually their own internal documents talking about how they paid off, in this particular instance, 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, and then to exonerate sugar. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease, and just shut it down. And it did shut it down. And since then, the heart disease rates have tripled. We reduced our fat and cholesterol intake by 30%, reduced red meat by 33%, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively. And heart disease has tripled. And so many other things have increased as well, including obesity and cancer. So that's just sort of indicative of this. You can get people in high places saying things that are completely suspect. And now we have hard data on that. So it would be nice if these people could be held accountable. I don't know if they can be, as like statute of limitations on these things. And unfortunately, Ansel Keys is dead, so we can't kill him. And, so it's, we may have sort of lost our chance here, but we can at least educate people and show the historical record and let people become aware of the fraud, and so that they can make different decisions if they choose to.
Yeah, it's just so maddening because I feel like everything is just about money. Like for all this nutrition stuff and everything on the shelves, it's just because people want to make money, and I don't know, pisses me off.
I think a lot of people are like, this isn't a conspiracy. And I am like, I agree. I think I don't think anyone's trying to hide anything anymore. There's, evidence and paperwork and documentation. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I just think that they are so reliant on us being dumbed down because it's just been regurgitated information for decades that there's no hiding it anymore. It's very openly out there and you can research. The studies done by the companies who are paying for the product that they're studying. I mean, I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's very obvious, but I don't know why it's labeled, well, this is a conspiracy to think that it was all fraudulent. It's like, it's not. It's actually very, very evident if you just do a little bit of researching.
Yeah. Well, the thing is too, conspiracy is just a group of people conspiring for a certain end, right? And but when people say like, oh, you're calling something a conspiracy, so it's a conspiracy theory, you're a conspiracy theorist, and that automatically means you're crazy, right? Because there's a lot of people that are saying some pretty wacky things, and so there's that. So you get lumped in, or something denier. You're saying you're a Holocaust. It's equating it to a Holocaust denier, saying you're denied that this ever happened. You're a whatever denier, and you don't have to be. I mean, the thing is that you're not paranoid if people are actually out to get you. And there are people that are actually trying to like you're saying, it is out in the public. It is out in the open. We have hard documentation of this. So whether it was people were conspiring or whether they were just trying to protect their interests, it happened. So it's not a conspiracy theory anyway. It's not a theory. It is fact. It's a matter of record. And whether you choose to recognize that record and whether that changes anything for you, is immaterial. It is a matter of record. That did happen. They did put out different research. They did pay off different professors like Ansel Keys, like these guys from Harvard and others, in order to protect their interests. So it's not a theory. It is a hard fact. And that is just what it is.
Yeah, well, that's what I like to say, like, because I've been called, you put your tin hat on, your conspiracy theorist. It's like, well, they're not conspiracies if they keep coming true,
Or conspiracy theories, because it could be a conspiracy. It's just not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy fact. I mean, it's in the peer-reviewed literature. This happened.
Yeah.
We have their own documents, right? It's not someone else saying, oh, I saw this guy who said this thing. It's like their own internal memos, their own internal documents. They talk about how they paid off these guys. We even have their contracts. We have the contracts that they paid these guys, $6,500. That's how much they got paid. That's equivalent to about $50,000 in today's valuation. That's how much it cost for them, for their entire academic integrity and just the health of the world. That was how much they needed to pay them in order to completely betray every ounce of of academic integrity that they have ever had. And it's pretty shocking, but we have their contracts with their signatures on it. Like this is not a theory. This is a hard fact, and people can look it up. Journal of American Medical Association, 2016, they published this. It's from the University of San Francisco Medical School, UCSF. So this is just a matter of record. Just like the tobacco files, we now have the sugar files. This is a fact, and hopefully they have to pay something for it. I mean, they make $1.3 trillion a year. So, $400 billion fine probably is not going to do too much to them. But, you at least it would be something, and to get this out on the record, because people still smoke. People still smoke a lot, even that coming out saying like, oh yeah, I know they admitted all this stuff. It really didn't change too much. I mean, smoking rates did go down, but, they haven't stopped. And, so at least getting it out there, at least it will be better, so people can understand what they're working with and understand that sugar is not just an empty calorie. It actually is a harmful substance that, should be at least limited in our lives, but it's not. It's in everything. And so that's part of the problem.
Yeah, definitely. Devin, do you want to get to the other couple questions we have from?
Yeah, so we have some questions that I feel like aren't addressed enough. One of the ones that we really wanted to ask you about, because we know that you're starting to get into and have some background in cancer. And there is a very, very popular thing that is out there that red meat causes colon cancer. Can you speak to that, the truth, the correlation, the causation, where that came from and why it's not true or it is true?
Yeah. Yeah. No. So a lot of these things in nutritional science, if you can call it that, is just epidemiological like surveys. Like literally, you send out a survey to several thousand people, and you say like, "Well, what did you eat? How much did you eat? How do you feel?" It's not great. It's not great information. It's not high level evidence. But if done well, you can get some information out of it, and if you do it right, it can actually be pretty useful. These ones, unfortunately, were not. These were done. They cherry picked data. They decided what went into the results of this study. They decided what didn't go in. They also, they lumped things in with meat that probably didn't deserve on it. So pizza counts as meat. I was like, well, there's a few other things going on there, so it's not like they were, they were trying to figure out what people were actually eating. They were trying to lump in bad things like processed garbage, pizza in with meat. And so if you eat a certain amount of meat, and they were calling things meat that were mostly carbs and sugar and seed oils, they were calling them meat, and they were lumping all those in there. I think on purpose, honestly, because they had an agenda. And so the association that they found was actually still pretty weak. It was only an 18% increase in the amount of increased correlation with red meat or just meat in general and colon cancer. So when you're doing something like in a survey, obviously there's so many other things going on. There's so many other factors called confounding factors that could skew things one way or the other. So unless you find a pretty high signal, meaning there's a high association with it, like over 200%, you really can't count it for anything. It really doesn't mean anything. So this was an 18%. So really, it shouldn't even have made the radar, but people latched on that and say, "Oh, see, look, this increases your cancer rates." And people just decided not to look into it and not to actually see like, well, is that actually a legitimate conclusion to draw? They just said, "Oh, look at that." And so it just got pushed around and pushed around and pushed around. Since then, they've done other, and the thing is too, is that, when people have been told that meat and red meat is going to kill you for 40, 50 years now. And so what are some of these same people doing? Well, people that eat more meat than, than they're saying that this threshold meets, saying that they're also more willing to smoke, more willing to drink, more willing to drive too fast, die in a car accident, or die in extreme sports. So these people have just basically said, "You know what? I don't care if meat's going to kill me. I enjoy it. I'm going to eat it." So they have that attitude of like, the devil may care sort of attitude, where it's just like, yeah, whatever, I'm going to live my life. And so there are a few other things going on there, and smoking and drinking more than other people will certainly damage your health. And so you can't really take that into account. There have been other studies done since then. I just sort of looking up here, but there was one just published on the 10th of October in Nature magazine. And it's called "The Health Effects Associated with Consumption of Unprocessed Red Meat, a Burden of Proof Study." And this was a meta-analysis that was done and actually showed, yeah, there's really a weak, if any, association between this. And, association is not causation. Correlation is not causation, right? Because there's a correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks. Okay. That does not mean that like when you buy ice cream, it just pisses sharks off and they're just going to take you out. It just means that there's something else going on there that's influencing both, right? Because it's hot in the summer, and so people are buying ice cream and they're going in the water where the sharks are, right? So correlation is not causation. And all of these epidemiological studies, they can only ever show correlation, and that's all they've ever done. And that's why the nonsense of saying cholesterol and saturated fat, oh, this definitely does this. There isn't a single piece of high level evidence to show causation between saturated fat or cholesterol and heart disease. None, zero, zilch, nada. But there are numbers of studies and meta-analyses looking at the data and looking at the body of information. And they found that, hey, look, there isn't even a correlation. And even Ansel Keys' original research, he cherry picked out which countries to look at in a 7-nation study, and that if you looked at all the nations, you really wouldn't see a strong correlation at all. It was, half of the countries were, that had high cholesterol intake actually had low heart disease rates. So, there isn't even really a correlation here. If there is one, it's weak. And again, correlation is not causation. However, there are studies showing that there is no correlation. And while you can't prove causation with correlation, if you show that there's no correlation, that does prove that there's no causation, because if something is causing another thing, they obviously would have a correlation, right? And so if you prove that there's no correlation, that proves there's no causation. And that's actually what a lot of these studies do. And that big study in Nature showed, there's really isn't a correlation between meat and cancer either.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that is just one of the biggest things. And I get my grandpa had severe colon cancer. It ended up taking his life. And,
Right.
he was told to be on a high fiber diet and he died. You know what I mean? And so he ate all the nuts, all the seeds, all the things. He was a farmer. He grew his own vegetables and he still died. You know what I mean? So I personally get a little like, is that something I should be concerned about? And I based on my research, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, obviously, what this is doing. So, it.
Well, and what's concerning is I talked to my doctor last Tuesday about what I was eating. And he's like, oh yeah, you shouldn't have that much red meat. It causes colon cancer. My opinion is we are designed to eat chicken and fish. And I haven't eaten red meat in 30 years. And I'm like, well, I can kind of tell, like, you're not the epitome of health. So that's kind of concerning that he's giving this advice out to people when clearly it's not accurate.
Yeah, I eat red meat nearly every day of my life. So like, and I just feel better when I do. That's the funny thing too, is that this just gets bandied around so much and just repeated so much. Listen to the words he said: red meat causes colon cancer. I would ask him, is this like, that's really interesting. Can you show me the study that shows causation? I mean, shake his world, because it's going to make him go, oh, well, he might get very defensive, oh, I don't have time, whatever. But if he does, I mean, that tells you something too. you should be confident. I've got like hundreds of studies on my phone at all times. People say, well, where's the study? So, oh, here it is. There you go. I have no problem doing that. I have no problem backing up what I have to say. And so, he should be able to back it up too. But that's the thing too. It might make him think, say, oh, can you show me the study that shows causation? Because I've only heard that there was a weak association. They were problematic studies that had a lot of confounding factors. Is there something that shows causation? Can you show it to me? Say, oh yeah, no, it definitely is. Okay, can you show it to me? And maybe he'll just brush it off, but maybe it'll actually make him think and start looking around and going like, damn it, there really isn't anything. Like, ugh, I need to. I might be giving the wrong advice. Probably not. A lot of people, it takes a lot. It takes a lot for them to really shake their beliefs. But it does happen. And I've spoken to a lot of doctors, and I pointed these things out, and they just go, damn it, like, okay. And then they start looking into it more themselves, and then they start really finding, I'm like, yeah, that's I've found that there's a lot of things in medicine that are based on almost nothing, but it sounded good at the time. It sounded plausible enough that it just got passed around and passed around and passed around and repeated so many times that people just said like, yep, that's what it is. And so, the whole idea that cholesterol causes heart disease, from the Framingham study, there's a famous study called Framingham study in Framingham, Massachusetts, where they followed people. It was like a 30-year prospective cohort study. They followed these guys for like 30 years or something, 20, 30 years. And it was, taught to me in medical school that the Framingham study showed that the higher levels of cholesterol correlated with higher levels of cardiovascular disease, but that's not actually true. The actual results and the actual conclusions found the opposite. Actually found that if you lower your cholesterol, these problems went up, and actually the higher cholesterol was protective. And The problem was that 2 years later, the American Heart Association misrepresented those results and said that they were the opposite for whatever reason. I have no idea why. They may have been bought and paid for by the sugar companies too. I don't really know why else they would just make that up and just completely misrepresent these findings, but they did. And that is what was taught in medical schools for the next 40 years. And it was taught to me in medical school in 2009. So this is still going on. And which is crazy because the actual Framingham study showed the opposite. So these things that just get repeated and repeated and repeated, and then you just think it's true, and it's not. And so I've had to go back through, and when I've been looking through the data and the literature, I found that like, yeah, that actually isn't something that's supported by the data, and that we make this supposition and it sounds good at the time, and then people actually do the studies and say, okay, well let's take a look at it. Like, does too much protein damage your kidneys? And if you're having kidney problems, should you reduce your protein level? And that's what everyone says. They say, yes, you should. Well, actually, the studies show the opposite, that higher levels of protein actually improve kidney function and health, and certainly don't harm it. And so, I've seen people actually seriously improve their kidney conditions by going on a high protein, especially meat-based diet, and getting rid of all these things that are harmful to them. I've seen people come off dialysis, which is not supposed to happen, but it happens. And actually, yeah.
I had an enlarged kidney, and then I did carnivore, and I don't. I mean, I'm 30 years old. So to have like an enlarged kidney at 30 years old, I was like, shit, like this is like, I'm too young for this. And pretty much everything went away when I started doing carnivore.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. That's fantastic. And, and that goes completely against what most people are being taught in medical school, or even in their subspecialties in nephrology. I've spoken to a lot of these guys. Oh, no, you gotta get away from protein. I've had friends that have had kidney issues. My buddy of mine was 35 and he was going into kidney failure, and I think he had like 19% kidney function. And it was just slowly getting worse and slowly getting worse. And he was working with this nephrologist, and they were putting him on all these meds, and you have to go basically plant-based, whole food, raw vegan, all that sort of stuff, and stay the hell away from meat. And he was a power lifter, and so he, he had been, eating a lot of meat, but a lot of everything for his whole life. And, and so he was just getting worse and slowly worse and worse and worse, taking their advice. And the argument is, it's like, well, everything's getting worse, but what's going on? I was like, well, imagine if you didn't take my advice, it would be really bad. That's what they say. But of course, that's not the case all the time. And so I was speaking to him, and I was just like, listen, I've come across the sort of thing that meat actually being really good for you. Here's the studies that show that that's good for your kidneys, and that other things in plants that can harm your kidneys, like oxalates and other things that actually really bung up your kidneys. You get rid of those things, so that can be good. And he said, you know what? Like, I have nothing to lose. Might as well give it a try. In 3 months, he was back up to 80% kidney function. And his nephrologist was like, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to die. And it's like, it's going the opposite of what you're saying. You said to do all these things, take all these drugs, and this would help me. It only hurt me. Now I'm doing the opposite of what you said. I'm doing this other thing, and you're telling me don't do it, but it's actually helping. It's like, yeah, but it's helping now, but you're going to die. Like, literally, it's like, couldn't even see what was happening in front of his face. It was going completely counter to what he said was going to happen. A theory is only as good as what it's able to predict. And this guy was predicting dead opposite of the results of what he was actually getting. And he still didn't have the insight into the situation and go, maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I should look into it. But yeah, so my buddy fired that guy. His kidneys are normal now. They're back to normal.
That's so wild that they it's got to be an uncomfortable feeling to question everything you've been told and to have some doubts and ask questions. So yeah, that's pretty wild. I know you need to go. Devin, do you want to ask? We have just like 3 fun little quick answer questions for you before you tell everyone where to find you.
We feel like it's always the same thing, and we want to like ask people things that are just not carnivore related. So number one, what are you currently watching or currently reading?
I'm reading Victor Davis Hanson book called Carnage and Culture, and just sort of a step back through Western civilization and warfare and how that's affected, and how just the Western culture just the idea of freedom and individual liberty actually has a big effect on the battlefield as well, which is why Western civilizations have been as dominant as they have been historically in the field of war as well, which is kind of interesting. And going back through from ancient Greek through Roman to the conquistadors and the world wars and things like that. Pretty interesting. Watching, I don't really watch too much. I don't really have time to watch anything. Every now and then I'll just sort of be like, oh, I got some time. Maybe I'll watch Netflix or something like that. And I keep looking around. I'm like, there's nothing interesting on. So I just keep watching Archer and Rick and Morty. That's basically when I watch things, that's what I do. And, but yeah, Archer's like my favorite show of all time. And then Rick and Morty would be right up there with it.
Okay. Number 2, what is your favorite curse word?
That's a good question. I think probably the funniest is when someone call someone a fucktard. I mean, I think that one's just kind of funniest. But yeah, I swear way too much. That's actually a problem, and so I don't even notice it when I do it. But I have like 2 modes. I either swear a lot or I don't swear at all. And so if I'm in front of kids or patients or in a formal setting, like I won't swear at all. And then with like my rugby friends and things like that, it's just a cascade of profanity. But and I don't even notice one way or the other. Like it still seems the same to me. I still feel like I'm just expressing my thoughts. And I'm with different people, it just comes out very differently. It's kind of funny.
Awesome.
Courtney's we're both. I'm married to a soldier, so I'm done for. And number 3, pre-carnivore, what was your favorite non-carnivore food?
Oh, probably like Thai food, like pad Thai. I really like that. Yeah.
When's the last time you've had that?
2016. Maybe. Yeah. 2016. Yeah. I was in Thailand. Yeah.
Okay. Do you ever have a cheat meal here and there?
Nah. I mean, realistically, like if you were to ask me what my favorite meal was before I went carnivore, it would still be steak. Like that was always my favorite meal. My favorite non-carnivore thing would have been something like pad Thai or something like that. But no, I always just loved steak. That was all I want. That's what I was saying. Like it always feels like it's my birthday. I was talking to my dad when I was doing this. I was like, it just feels like it's my birthday every single day, because like on your birthday, you get the meal, the no guilt meal that is like, you can just have whatever you want because it's your day. And every single time it was a big ass steak, maybe some like prawns and butter and things like that. But it was just, the main thing was just a massive, massive steak, eating my fill on beef. And that was every year. That's what I wanted. And so now it's every single day. That's what I have. And I wet age and dry age and prepare these things. And I was like, it's just amazing. Literally my mouth is watering now. It's so good every single time. It's just amazing. So that's what that really has always been my favorite food. So no, I don't feel the need to cheat, because there's nothing when you're married to a supermodel, you don't need to cheat, like you're fine, and so like I'm happy with the way I'm doing it.
Yeah, it never gets old.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Can you just tell everyone who might not know where they can find you, where you're most active, your social media handles?
Yeah. So my main thing is my YouTube channel, my podcast. My YouTube channel is just my name, Anthony Chafee, MD, and I have a lot of different videos on there. My podcast is called The Plant Free MD, and that has a lot of the audio version of my videos. But there's if people like listening to things as well. I have other things on YouTube as well, the little videos like cooking videos or a lot of shorts and things like that. And then I do like live things as well on there as well. And then otherwise social media wise, trying to be more active on Twitter. It's just Anthony_Chafee. And then Instagram is probably most active on, and that's just Anthony Chafee MD as well. And I have other links to different socials and Rumble and all these sorts of different things. And you can all be found through like my YouTube or my Instagram. And I have a link tree there that has sort of everything else that people can find.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. It was fun.
Awesome. Bye.